Welcome to Slaying the Dragon for puzzles. This is the first video in the series and contains an introduction of the Levenfish variation against the Sicilian Dragon. Okay, let's face the dragon. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, the open Sicilian, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and now, of course, g6. Now, the Sicilian Dragon is one of the, if not the most popular opening on the club level. And of course in tournaments it also played a lot. So wouldn't it be nice to have a very sharp weapon against this dragon? I suggest we play the Levenfish variation with f2, f4. Now, the Levenfish is not the most popular line against the dragon, which is bishop e3, leading to the Yugoslav attack, etc., etc. But it has a lot of surprise value and is a decent line. Black is hunted down from move 6 and has to play very precise to cross the minefield, because that's what the Levenfish is, a minefield. It contains a lot of traps that black must seek to avoid. And, what's best, in playing for traps, white does not have to be afraid that he will end up worse, which is often the case if you just egoistically play for traps and your opponent sees through it, since it is the main line of the Levenfish that contains the traps. Furthermore, the Levenfish is very concrete, and therefore the moves and principles can be studied and memorized fairly easily. And last but not least, it is a great way to sharpen your tactics and practice concrete play. Okay, now in the next videos we will see that it is not so easy for black to decide on his sixth move, since the best reply is counterintuitive. But for now we look at the main idea of the Levenfish and white's main threats. What if white got the chance to move again and execute his threats? Okay, now let's suppose that black does nothing and white has a chance to execute his threats. Now, first of all, what are these threats? I will go back. And of course white wants to play here e4, e5. And in doing so he attacks the knight on f6 and also attacks the pawn on d6. And sometimes also threatens to go on to e6 and then harass the f7 weak point. Okay, but if white manages to dislodge this knight here on f6, then normally it's not so easy for this knight to find a stable home. Furthermore, this knight is protecting the d7 square, which is usually a very useful blockading square to defend against this checking diagonal from b5 to e8. So an additional threat for white would be to play a timely bishop f1, b5 check, harassing black's pieces. Okay, so here we go. e4, e5. We give white the extra move. Now black can play a number of moves here. And the most important ones are knight h5, which is probably the most tenacious, bishop g4, attacking white's queen, and of course the obvious d takes e5. Okay, first we will look at d takes e5, which is probably not the best move in this position. But since white is already playing with an extra move, we can figure that black is in great danger in this position. But like I said, this is all to show you the main idea of the Levenfish and see what happens if white gets the chance to execute his threats. Of course, white now recaptures, and black now plays the knight to g4. Now in turn he wants to take this brutal pawn here on e5. But it's white's move, and he gets this check-in on b5. Now, there's already a moment here where black can go gravely wrong. For instance, bishop d7 simply allows queen takes g4, since the bishop on d7 is pinned. So, that's not possible. Also, of course, knight d7 to block against the check, again leads to queen takes g4. So after bishop b5, queen d7 would be silly, so really the only move that black can consider here is knight c6. Again renewing the threat to take the pawn on e5. Now, you would think, okay, but now I can take the knight, right? Knight takes c6, in between queen takes d1 check, king takes d1. But after a6, black is surviving the worst, even though white still has a serious advantage here. Now, better after knight c6 is first to protect the pawn on e5 with bishop f4, which now renews the threat of taking on c6, because white is now also protecting his queen with the rook from d1, and of course we would like to recapture with the rook on d1 rather than with the king. So now really again black is in a tight spot. For instance, if he would play bishop d7 to defend against the threat on c6, then we would see another idea in action, very nice, e5, e6. Now this is attacking the defending bishop, and it's also attacking the weak point on f7, and furthermore it's blocking the defensive diagonal from the bishop on d7 to the knight on g4. Of course, after bishop takes e6, knight c6 would work out for white, so after e6 let's take a look at f takes e6. Now, more complicated and less convincing would be to go now to take the knight immediately, because now black has a counter-strike with knight takes d4. And after this exchange here on d7, white can play bishop e5, but after knight takes c2 check, king e2, knight takes a1, and bishop takes h8, things are a little bit more complicated than white would have liked. So after f takes e6, white uses a very important chess principle. First, take away the counter chant. So instead of allowing knight takes d4, white starts with taking out the knight himself. Knight takes c6 here. Okay, now b takes c6 is the best move, harassing the bishop on b5. Let's look at what would happen after bishop takes c6, which would be a mistake. Of course, then bishop takes c6 in between check, exchanging the piece, and then after b takes c6, winning another one on g4. So this explains why after knight takes c6, b takes c6 is the best move. But now it does make sense for white to finally capture this knight here on g4. And at the moment he's a piece up, and he's also threatening bishop e5, completely harassing black's king side. So strangely enough, objectively, it would be best here to go bishop g7 for black, because black has another trick up his sleeve. Let's see what would happen after c takes b5, which seems to be the more logical move. Then bishop e5 would be played, and after rook g8, protecting the rook, then rook f1 is very strong, leading to a winning advantage. It's threatened. It threatens knight f3, queen f3, with an invasion of black's king side, which was made possible, by the way, of the thrust e5, e6. Now, note that in this situation, after rook g8, it would be a mistake for white to try and achieve the same by means of castles, because this puts the king on a vulnerable diagonal here. Now, for instance, bishop g7, and after taking and recapturing and queen f3, black has queen b6 check, clearing the back rank for a castle's queen side. So just because of this check, black wins 2 moves. So that's always very important to note, that in Sicilian positions, open Sicilian positions, where white has played f2 f3 or f2 f4, his king is always subject to a black check from b6 or c5 or whatever. Okay, so we saw what happened after c takes b5, and we saw then that rook f1 was the better move. So this would lead to a winning position for white. So the relatively better move after queen takes g4 would be the aforementioned bishop g7, because I mentioned black has a final trick up his sleeve. Now, if bishop d3, safeguarding the bishop, still enjoying the extra piece advantage, black can go e5, launching a discovered attack on both bishop and queen. But now there is a nice intermezzo, some kind of a desperado intermezzo, you could say. Bishop takes g6 check, h takes g6, and with queen takes g6 check, white safeguards his queen from capture, and after king f8, the only move, and bishop g5, it has become very clear that white has a winning position. Of course, this has to do with the fact that black's king is very unsafe on f8, that white's forces are very menacingly placed, and also that white can very easily involve the rooks in the final attack on black's king. I can hardly imagine black surviving the coming onslaught. Now, isn't that a beautiful word? Okay, so this was a line from bishop f4, where we looked at bishop d7, leading in the end to a winning position for white. Now let's have a look at another move, bishop f4, bishop g7 for instance, after which we could see the threat of taking on c6 in action. Knight takes c6, b takes c6, bishop takes c6 check, and now after bishop d7, black is losing the exchange. Bishop takes the rook in the corner, queen recaptures, and after knight takes d5, white has a winning material and positional advantage. Okay, so then what is the best defense after bishop f4? Now, I've told you before in other videos, and I will continue to do so, that chess is a game of attack and defense. And there is a number of ways in which you normally can defend against attacks, especially when play is very concrete, very analytical, very tactical, as in the current position. It pays off to run by the different kinds of defenses you can use against an attack. Now, first, can I take the attacking piece? Second, can I interpose something? Third, can I move the threatened piece out of the way? Fourth, can I protect or cover the attacked piece? Fifth, can I indirectly protect the attacked piece or square? And sixth, can I play a counter-attack? Now, if you run by these 6 options, you will get ideas that normally you would not see. And in this case, if you reach option number 6, defense by means of counterattack, then you will find the move a6. And in this case, it is also relatively best for black to play this. However, or I mean, unfortunately, yeah, however is a good word. Since we were executing white's threat, also this move does not help in the end, because now white again executes his threat of knight takes c6, and it turns out that this move is strong enough to maintain some sort of an advantage. Now, of course, this move threatens checkmate on d8, so play is getting very concrete now. Of course, a takes b5 leads to that very mate. Excuse me. B takes c6 leads to bishop takes c6, bishop d7, and again winning the exchange, where after queen d4 again white has a winning positional and material advantage. Also, queen takes d1 in between doesn't really help, because rook takes d1 renews the mating threat. So after knight takes c6 you would think, uh-oh, black is losing after all. But again, there is the principle of defending by means of a counterattack, and that is queen b6. Now this all of a sudden threatens mate on f2, and also, since there is no longer a mating threat on d8, both white pieces on b5 and c6 are threatened. Now that may not be a big deal at the moment because white is already a piece up, so he could save one. But he should try to save one, and also, or at least one, and also defend against the mate on f2. Now, this is not a training video, this is an introduction video, so I will not ask you to pause the video and look for a good move for white. I will just give it away. It is queen d4. Now this blocks, of course, the diagonal to f2, so it defends against the mate, but it counter-attacks, and that's the third time we're counter-attacking in this line. It counter-attacks the queen on b6. So again, defense by means of counter-attack. Now black cannot take the bishop or the knight, because then the queen would be lost. So relatively best here is just to take this queen, when white would at least salvage his knight from c6 in recapturing on d4. But now, yeah, black really has to recapture this piece, because he's one piece behind now. So he has to play a takes b5, but after knight takes b5, white is a pawn up. He has the superior development, and he has the initiative. Again, there is this threat, you know, of the knight going to c7 for king and rook. So black just won't find any peace of mind in this position, and I think it's safe to say that if white plays precise, that he is already winning in this position. Okay, so that was a discussion of the move d takes e5. But what happens if black plays here? Let's have a look. For instance, bishop g4, counter-attacking white's queen and trying to, you know, make use of the extra tempo to develop his quickness very quickly. But I think you, as a chess player, you should also develop this sense, this tactical sense, or this sense for stable or unstable pieces, and this sense or what you can do or what you can't do in chess. Because white now plays queen d2. He does not want to put his queen on d3 because that would block a possible bishop check on b5. And for the moment maybe this queen looks weird on d2, but still the knight is attacked on f6, and also the bishop on g4 is not feeling very well because it may be attacked by a later h2, h3, and then where would it go? You know, there's just not so many squares. So yeah, bishop g4, I would call this a kind of overstretching move, and again I would like you to develop a sense for stretching and overstretching, and just finding out with your Fingerspitzengefühl how far you can go in a chess position. Okay, queen d2, again the knight is threatened, so let's move it to d7, where it is safe for the moment. Now white can open up the e-file and give black a weak and isolated pawn on d6 here. That is also something to reckon with. And then he can already improve his queen by checking on e3. Now bishop e7 would lead to h3, so the best defense here is queen e7. But here we go again, knight c b5, attacking some weaknesses here in black's camp. And yeah, relatively best here is king d8. Of course, in this position, queen takes e3 check would be possible, but that would help white in his development. He would play bishop to e3, and then he could follow up with h3 and g4 maybe, or just try to exchange the knight from d4 for the bishop on g4 and bring his rook to the d file in castling queenside or not. So really relatively best, I suppose, here is king d8. Maybe later on black can chase away this knight, and then hopefully his king will find some kind of peace and quiet on c7, for instance. But after king d8, h3 would be good, and then after bishop e6, well, the bishop isn't going anywhere, so we don't really have to take it immediately. Of course, it would be good to take the bishop from a positional point of view, because white would win the bishop pair, and he would be very strong on the white squares. But for the moment, the knight on d4 is still a little bit stronger, and the bishop isn't going anywhere, like I said. Maybe the knight sometimes even supports moves like f4, f5, and at the moment, why not keep this option open? And now with the funny queen c3, I think white maintains a very strong initiative and a very serious advantage. If he is winning, I'm not so sure yet. In that respect, maybe bishop g4, the overstretching move, could be in fact a little bit better than d takes e5, as we saw here. But to return to queen c3, let's have a look at the position. I mean, black's king is in the center, white's pieces are hovering over his position. I suppose black has some decent moves here, like knight f6 or bishop d5, discovered check, which would be answered with bishop e3 or maybe bishop e2 or something, or yeah, bishop e3 probably, and white would be able to castle queenside. So yeah, all the advantage is on white side here, really. Okay, well, that leaves us with the knight h5 move on the 7th, and this has the benefit that it does not open up the diagonal for the bishop on c1, which would happen if black would take on e5, as we saw earlier. And that was pretty good for white, because in this line, if you remember, we go there quickly, he was able to play bishop f4. Now, there is no bishop f4 anytime soon after knight h5, unless, of course, black again decides to take on e5. But yeah, knight h5 has other disadvantages. The knight is sitting on the edge of the board, and a knight on the rim is dim, as they say. And white can continue in the well-known fashion with bishop b5 check. Now again, if for instance knight d7, e6 would be a typical idea. Again, attacking the knight on d7, and it would do so with check. So really the only defense you would take into account here would be f takes e6, but then, oh, look at this centralized knight. It jumps into a superb square on e6, attacking the black queen on d8, and it appears that after queen a5, which is probably the only safe square, because after, let's see, queen b6, there would be knight d5, for instance. Then after queen a5 and queen d5, the black queen is lost. It's incredible. The queen could go to b4, but it would be chased with a3. And there are just no safe squares for the queen anymore, and no defenses left. Really, black is going to lose his queen here, or suffer some other kind of serious damage. Well, I suppose that ends our introduction of the Levenfish variation against the Sicilian Dragon. I have pointed out the main threats of the move f2, f4. They all start with the move e4, e5, trying to dislodge the knight on f6. This is a very useful idea to try out in your games. Of course, this video was designed for your understanding of white's threats, and in a certain way it's a little bit science fiction, because of course white is not allowed to play 2 moves in a row. So in the next videos we will look at the different moves that black has at his disposal on the 6. Like I said, the best move is counterintuitive, and it's not easy for black to decide on his best reply. So yeah, I hope to see you again in the next videos when we will discuss some real serious theory. Okay, thanks for watching.